Hi, everyone. I see the attendees are steadily rolling in. So we will get started. We have a very rich and exciting and complicated conversation to get into today. So we want to stay on time. So welcome, everyone. My name is Jenny Sudick. I am the manager of International Programs and Collaborations Office at OCAD University. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to Navigating Precarity, a Transatlantic Roundtable. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which I am joining you today. I am calling from Toronto, or Tuk Toronto in the Mohawk language, a word historically referring to where there are trees standing in the water. This land is situated on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat peoples. It is also part of the Dish with One Spoon territory, a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of Six Nations, emphasizing peace, friendship, and respect for the land and its resources. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis people, and we recognize our shared responsibility to steward these lands and foster respectful relationships with Indigenous communities. While I am joining from Toronto, many of you are participating from around the world. I encourage everyone to reflect on the lands and the waters where they are located and to consider the original caretakers of these territories. Today, OCAD-U and TransEuropols are hosting this policy roundtable to foster dialogue on civic engagement, sustainability, and governance in response to precarity shaping our cultural and creative sectors today. This event brings together the work and concerns of several teams at OCAD University alone, the International Programs and Collaborations Office, the Cultural Policy Hub, and the Global Center for Climate Action. Each of these initiatives is committed to fostering dialogue, advancing research, and building networks that address the pressing challenges faced by cultural workers and creative practitioners around the world. I would like to welcome my colleague Samuel Lafrance, manager of the Cultural Policy Hub, to share some remarks.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today on behalf of the Cultural Policy Hub, and just want to reiterate our thanks to our colleagues at OCADU and at TransEuropols for inviting us to be part of this event. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, the Cultural Policy Hub is a bilingual national network based out of OCAD University in Toronto that brings together researchers, policymakers, artists, and cultural workers to develop policy solutions to address issues that impact the cultural sector and creative industries in Canada. Our aim is to take an inclusive, informed, and integrated approach to the development of cultural policy, and our work focuses on the most important public policy issues where culture can play a role. So this includes things like exploring how digital transformation and new technologies are shaping artistic and cultural work, or reflecting on the ways in which the arts and culture can contribute to democratic engagement and social cohesion. And lately, a big focus of our work has been on organizational precarity in the arts, culture, and heritage sector. We just recently published a report on the root causes of precarity in the arts in Canada that includes reflections from cultural leaders and funders on the challenges we face and some pathways we can take to address those challenges and build more resilience across the sector. So we'll also be hosting a roundtable next week with the author of that report and some of the leaders who were consulted to dig into those issues and solutions more deeply. And these are part of a larger slate of publications and convenings that we organize at the Hub, which are available on our website. So if you're interested in finding out more about our work, I'd encourage you to visit our website, which we'll share the link for in the chat. Please sign up for our newsletter or find us on LinkedIn at Cultural Policy Hub. Thanks again so much to you all for being here, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. And I'll pass it back to my colleague Jenny.
Thank you, Samuel. So, TransEuropols, or TEH, is an international NGO based in Lund, Sweden. Since 1983, TEH has championed the repurposing of abandoned buildings into vibrant cultural spaces across Europe and beyond. A member-led force for change, TEH embodies a bottom-up activist spirit that embraces creativity, community, and the transformative potential of urban space. Its network of cultural trailblazers includes visionaries working in cultural production, city planning, sustainable architecture, social innovation, and more, making TEH a dynamic platform for learning, advocacy, and exchange. We are grateful today for the support of the Nordisk Kulturfond, whose funding has made this event possible as part of their support of the Good Enough Transformation, or GET, a community of practice that brings together perspectives from community leaders from 9 cities across 4 continents to accelerate the global green transition through community-driven action. And we'll be sharing all the links to know about all these different exciting projects. Led by Transeuropols, GET empowers local collectives to share knowledge, break down silos, and implement small-scale accessible green transformations, proving that systemic change can begin at the micro-local level. Ultimately, GET seeks to demonstrate how collaborative networks and traditional knowledge can inspire immediate and meaningful progress towards a more sustainable future. GET not only advocates for sustainability, but also models the kind of collective action that is increasingly vital for cultural workers everywhere. So, in the same spirit of connection and shared purpose, today's roundtable responds to the realities faced by cultural workers across the globe, realities shaped by shifting economical, political, and social landscapes. We'll hear from voices with diverse experiences and perspectives as we seek to unpack the challenges of precarity, share strategies for resilience, and imagine new possibilities for collaboration and solidarity. Our aim is to not only highlight the issues, but to also foster a sense of connection and shared purpose among those who are shaping the future of the cultural sector. Today's conversation, while global in spirit, will focus specifically on the perspectives and challenges faced by cultural workers between Canada and Europe. Now it is my pleasure to pass the floor to Mika Reiners, Interim Managing Director of Transeuropols. OCAD University is proud to be an associate member of this distinguished organization, and we are honored to have Mika with us today to guide our conversation. Mika, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And Transeuropols is proud that OCAD University is a member of our network. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to our Policy Roundtable, Navigating Precarity, a Transatlantic Roundtable. Before I welcome our speakers, I would like to address some housekeeping to you. As you have seen, this Zoom meeting is recorded. We first have a panel discussion between Eleftherios and Patti that will last about 40 minutes. And after that, we will have time for questions and answers to our speakers. If they already arise during the conversation, please add them in the chat box and we will go through them after the discussion. The discussion, the panel will end around 5:30 Central European Time or 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. And maybe while we are doing further introductions, please in the chat put, as we are navigating precarity and navigating the world, you can write in the chat where you are located. Would be nice to see. I am located in a little village in Sweden. So now I would like to welcome our 2 speakers. Patti Pon has a deep and diverse experience in the art sector, having served in senior leadership positions. She has been president and CEO of the Calgary Arts Development since 2013, and she is affiliated with the Cultural Policy Hub and Calgary Arts Development at OCAD University in Canada. In the community, Patti was elected in 2021 as the first person of color to the board of the Calgary Stampede and has been awarded several medals. Welcome, Patti. Nice to see you. Eleftherios Kegagioglou is the director of Le Plus Petit Cirque du Monde, Centre Culturel de Rencontre, since 2007. He is an expert on artistic, cultural, and urban policies in disadvantaged areas, European programs, and intercultural dialogue. During the last 20 years, Eleftherios has been developing several artistic and urban projects focusing on their social and human impact. So welcome, Patti and Eleftherios. We will now have a dialogue together, and I would like to start setting the stage on the civic role of artists. So Patti, I would like to ask you first. As a public funder, how are you working to reframe artists not just as cultural producers, but artists as citizens and actors in civic life? What would it look like if public policy truly embraced this idea?
Thank you very much for the question, Mika. To those of you who are joining us, like Jenny, I just want to acknowledge that I am speaking with you from Treaty 7 territory, which is the original home of the Blackfoot people, the Nitsitapi. And Calgary was formerly known, and it continues to be known in the Blackfoot language as Mohinstis. In the Blackfoot language. And Nick or Omar, just if you could, I've put a link in the chat. I think I can only get in for our panelists and hosts, but if you could share that with the group. The link is to a site called nativeland.ca. And what it does is it shows you the nations of North America, and it's slowly making its way to identify the original peoples globally. So there's a few nations that are identified in Africa, for example, right now. But what it does is it shows you a breadth and a depth and a complexity to how our world is made up through an Indigenous worldview. And I'll be speaking to that later. So I just wanted to take a moment to provide that info, because I think my response to you, Mika, is going to lead us to that question. So artists as citizens is something that we've been thinking about here at Calgary Arts Development. We are the local municipal funder for the city of Calgary. I'm currently on sabbatical and hence working at the Cultural Policy Hub at OCAD University. And so in that kind of way of working as a public funder, as Mika has said, that means that the majority of the funds that I invest or I distribute on behalf of my local city government come from taxpayers, come from public funds. And so as I think about that, we have a way of describing ourselves where we say that Calgary Arts Development is a public funder stewarding public dollars for public good or public benefit. When all of the funds are coming from everybody who collectively contributes for the well-being of our city, we believe that as a public funder, we should be looking at supporting endeavors and arts and culture products and activities that are for the benefit of the public good, which includes which includes artists. So as we think about artists here in Canada and in Calgary, they pay property tax, they pay income tax, they don't get a discount on a liter of gasoline, they don't get a discount on a 4-liter jug of milk. So they're citizens like anyone else who does the same thing. And so just starting from that base premise, we then look to how might artists, through their artistic practice, through the lenses and filters that each of you as artists and creatives develop over years of an artistic practice, how might you contribute to making our world a better place that is deserving of all of us, not some of us? And particularly here in Canada, when we have the neighbor we have to the south, it's very challenging in these times. And so in this most recent past, again, I said since COVID, we looked at the impact of COVID as an example on arts organizations and artists. And what we discovered is that it was terrible. The impact was huge. But most significantly, individual artists were impacted most severely, right? They lost their contracts and jobs first. In Canada, we don't have very many situations where artists are hired on a full-time or salaried basis. which is quite different than what I know some countries in Europe are. They're what we call gig workers. So contract to contract, show to show, you're always looking for the next contract. They were let go first because everything closed. So there were no contracts to get. They did, again, as I said, they didn't get discounts. They were not eligible until much later in COVID for what we call unemployment insurance or a basic income during that time. So there was severe impact. And coming out of COVID, my organization wanted to focus on how do we return and center the artist inside an arts ecosystem in order to benefit and thrive. And so this conversation today is one that I'm very keen and honored to be a part of as we look at involving and engaging artists more in our civic life and in our civic engagement. Because what we know is that as artists and creatives, you have honed and developed a set of tools that are going to help us think about how we live in civil society in different ways, how we increase opportunities for all of us in a variety of ways. And I hope that's what we do as an organization going forward. Final thought. Thanks, Mika.
Thank you, Patty. What an amazing journey you have made as a public funder and policymaker. The arts ecosystem and centering the artist in civic life. Eleftherios, I assume you have lots of thoughts on that. And you have worked closely at the grassroots level in marginalized communities. How do you see the connection between grassroots cultural work with artists and policymaking? What needs to shift to make that bridge stronger and more effective? Especially, you work across many governance systems, like, for example, we had a test bed in Cyprus and Mexico. But what is your experience there, Eleftherios?
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be with you on this transatlantic conversation. So thank also Patty for this reflection. So I'm actually based in the suburbs of Paris. So my background is I'm originally from Greece. I came to France to study political science and international relations. And when I was 25, I quit my first job and started to work in social engaged art with engaged communities. Why? Because I think I could have been the other way from the policymakers. I made the choice to work this way because I needed to prove also for myself, of course, but also for the community that it's possible to build a new kind of conversation between policymakers, artists, communities, and citizens. I think there is a moment, we are living a momentum, and of course the COVID situation was an important one, but what we have been living for the past and we're living now the past 20 years, it's very relevant that we will not arrive by ourselves. Of course, we can, there is, of course, a big responsibility of public policy makers around the world, and I'm very happy to hear what you do in Calgary, but unfortunately, we all know that not all the policymakers are thinking the way that Calgary is thinking today. How can we do that? And so let's change the perspective. Let's say, what kind of responsibility do we have as artists, as an artistic and also grassroots organizations? And I think we have a responsibility. What I mean about that, I think we need to establish a new kind of dialogue where we can really have a conversation with all the policymakers. So public on the national level or regional level, depends on the countries, of course. Then all the local government, but also, of course, the other stakeholders. We can be also, of course, private companies, foundations, to address the situation. Of course, when I speak about that, we can say, okay, this is a wish. How can we do it? I think what's happening now is that for the first maybe time, a lot of also governments, they are saying that they don't know anymore how to handle the situation. On this question of crisis, which is both an economic, social, political, and cultural crisis, and of course an urban crisis, nobody has any more the solutions that are fitting, and we know that we need to work together. So this is one important thing, to make it also clear what was the core of the GET project, the Good Enough Transformation Project, is how the grassroots communities can go and meet, of course, the citizens, of course, the artists, the activists, the architects, but also the public stakeholders, to have a conversation, to explain what to do, to explain that small scale matters. For example, if we can do something on a small scale and work on that, and try to explain also to the public policymakers that we are a really added value, and that also we can have a conversation. How to do that? Inside these public policymakers, there are people. And of course, there are people like Patty, and there are people that are not also like Patty, that they have other ways of thinking. But anyway, we have to build a conversation, especially with the people where we think there is no ground in the beginning, where we think they are thinking completely different, because this is the most important challenge. Otherwise, we're going to have complete ghettos, and we will never can bring and change. Are we sure you are going to succeed? No. Maybe it's the contrary. It's because we are almost sure that it's very hard to succeed, that we need to do. And when we are doing things, I can give the example of what we have been doing here for a short time. So I'm leading a grassroots organization, started very small. That's why it's called the smallest circus in the world. That was 20 years ago. And in 20 years, we went 20 times up. How? Because of this question of being together on different levels. So I had a background, of course, also of cultural management, but I could never have succeeded without the community, without the people involved in the community, with other collaborators, and without going and speaking with all the organizations. It's very important to establish this dialogue in order to first change also the perception they have, the way we're going to build projects together, because funding is one part, but in order to share or to obtain this funding, first point is what kind of project can we build together. So I think it comes general sometimes, but it's very concrete on the other hand, that we should go and have these meetings, these conversations on all these levels, establish new alliances where we're also going to open. I can give you last example, and I stop there for the moment. We started as an organization working with performing arts, with circus, and then we opened to hip hop and to urban cultures, and then we opened to other activities. Then we have built a wonderful building with an architect that is really promoting participatory architecture and let's say, of course, advocacy planning. And by that moment, we say, okay, it's important that we are also becoming a member of the city planning. So when we appear and we say we're going to do city planning, it was like, what's happening? A circus organization that is claimed, and now we got, after 8 years, and we are a national center also for neglected areas. So I think it's a question of time, a question of conversation, and a question of advocacy. And in this end, this kind of project we are doing now with OCAD University, so a university, stakeholders, policymakers, is this more global alliance that could facilitate. And all of our knowledge for the past 20 years, we made a lot of international projects where the university researchers, the citizens, the artists, and the policymakers came together and made this conversation.
Thank you so much, Eleftherios. Patty, would you like to react on this? I saw you nodding.
Sure. Well, I just so appreciate that Eleftherios is able to provide us with real experience in this that is of a length of time. So 20 years in Canada, whereas Canada, we're not even 170 years old. 20 years is an entire generation of experience. And so I'm very interested in hearing from you, and particularly because I think many of the things that I think might be ways we can involve artists here in Canada, you're actually doing. So, you talked earlier about the way in which reaching into community was one of the success factors that has led to your growth and your position in city planning, in other ways of including marginalized communities. That's the theory that I hold. That's the hypothesis that I hold. And so I'm very interested and grateful that you have proven it. And so, needless to say, I'll probably be participating in the Q&A after we have our discussion as well, because I'm very interested in learning more. In Canada, we refer to artists who are undertaking social change as part of their artistic practice as an area known as art for social change. And it's only been very recently, within the last 10 years, not even, that as public funders, we've been supporting activities like that as a recognized, oops, I might be frozen. Oh, there we are. As a recognized artistic practice. Until then, it's been project grants, scrape money where you can. Sponsors didn't really know about it. So I am very appreciative of hearing about your real world, real time experience in this respect.
Yes. Thank you, Patty. We will get to this social engaged, social change embedded in the practice very soon. Now, Eleftherios, about engaging communities and the public space, urban planning. You work with the famous architect Patrick Bouchin. In your reaching into the community, as Patty was just saying, you often speak to me about renewing dirty or neglected public spaces through artist engagement. It sounds like it's a very practical example of the work you do. Could you share also to us an example of how this transformation happens in practice and what role community plays in reclaiming these negative commons, as you often refer to?
Yes, of course. So I can give you an example, for example, of an international project that we made for 4 years in Greece, in Elefsina. So Elefsina is in the suburbs of Athens. It's now a small town of 25,000 inhabitants, but it's a very famous ancient city of the mysteries of Elefsina. So with a beautiful archaeological place with this temple of goddess Dimitra. This city has been the most industrial area of Greece, of modern Greece, in the 70s. So a city that was completely destroyed, but very aggressive capitalistic and industrial development. So in Europe, there is this important title of European Capital of Culture. And so in this frame, it's a very interesting frame because when a city becomes a European Capital of Culture, there is a global thinking about what things can we do to improve the life in every city. Of course, the answer varies in every city, but there are different subjects. And so also to answer a little bit to Patty's question is how can we take art out from the artistic sector, because this one of the problem of the art is to be really only in the artistic part. Art is part of our life and has to come back where it is, which is art is part of politics, art is part of social change, is part of economics, is part of ecology. So when you build a European Capital of Culture, then there is this question, how can you improve the life and the cultural life of the city? So I have been involved in this project that was been, the name was Climbing Over Elefsina, Revisiting the Landscapes of Elefsina. So for 4 years, and we started with Patrick Bouchin. We went to this city, and the first was to visit the city and to meet different kind of stakeholders, of people, organizations, and then the mayor. Have a conversation with all these people and understand what they were looking for. The most of them, they were against the European Capital of Culture, saying we don't need culture, we have our own culture. What we need is less pollution. What we need is green space, because it's, of course, you know, Greece, it gets very high level temperatures in summer, it's of 40, 45. So there is a lack of green, of spaces where you can have some fresh air. So they were saying we need that. So when we started, we had the chance to meet, and artistic director was very open to these subjects. And because we proposed him something different than a classical artistic creation process, he was very keen to collaborate with us. So we told him, we asked him to propose some spaces where there were some issues to do something with really no budget. There was no budget to build something, but there was some budget to do something, just to be there. So very small. So by the end, our choice was to work on a neglected area that was very close to the archaeological site of Elefsina, and where there were a lot of trees, especially eucalyptus trees. So it was quite green. And the young people of the area, they wanted to have a space for them, and they want also to have a skate park. So what is interesting in the way that, as I was speaking of advocacy planning or participatory architecture, or I think what we've been saying that, Patty, that artists are citizens, and is that you cannot make a project if the people that are going to participate are not part of the project from the beginning. So when we arrive there and we visit all these spaces, we want to meet the people. So we met the young people that the European Capital of Culture tried to gather together to see what they wanted. And so for 3 years, we have been working with them. We have been working with the citizens, and we have been walking around all this area. We have been collecting garbage. We have been really collecting information. We collected memories of these spaces. And then with some activists and architects, we made some very, very small interventions that cost like maybe 2,000 euros, nothing. It was just very small. With that, the mayor came back and he was against the project. Say, okay, I think maybe you are right, maybe we can try something. And say, okay, we can try only for 1 year. So we cleaned the space, and then we brought some ephemeral structure. And then by the end, the artistic director, he found some money, so he made a skate park. A big collective from Belgium came, and they brought a beautiful wooden structures that they put on this area. So there was a kind of alliance of 5, 6 different projects. The public stakeholder, the artistic director of the European capital, and then a lot of local people and citizens. And because we value the space, because we changed the situation, there was like a decision to make it. So I will also, I can send you, of course, some elements about the project. If you Google on climbing over Elefsina, you can find some information and some beautiful video about that. But this is an example of how this question of alliance of all the levels and all on the same level, because what we did every time is we made a public dialogue, a public meeting, and the young people, they had more time to speak than the mayor. So we inverse the situation. We convinced the mayor to come and to listen first, the young people, to come on the ground, to visit the space, and then to speak. So this way of changing the perspective and giving the solutions and giving that the idea of the solution, that if we put some more money, we can really solve a big issue for the city, then could change. So in order to sum up, I think this idea of showing on the ground with the people what is possible is much more important than telling about. So it's maybe the same as novelists, they say, show, don't tell. It's the same thing, I think. Show what is possible to do with the communities, and always with involving the communities. The inhabitants of the city, we visit their house, they open their houses, they show their culture. They played music for us. So there was a whole thing about rediscovering the city and giving value to these areas that had no value, because it was the most neglected city in Greece. The motto of the city was the city where nobody stops.
Thank you, Eleftherios. This is so very, very inspiring, how to change a city into more vibrant and a livelihood by simple and small actions, and walk and talk. Walking, looking, talking with stakeholders, with each other, and then also listening, learn others to listen. Patty, I guess this is another very concrete example, and now we can maybe zoom out a little bit to the funder level, because also in Canada, many artists have long embedded social change in their practice, but public funders have only recently recognizing this. How are you working to reshape funding structures to better reflect the civic and social dimensions of artwork and artistic work after you have heard now Eleftherios?
Well, I again, very appreciative, Eleftherios, that you set the stage, so to speak, for the reasons why, as public funders, right, back to that public good and that public benefit. And by the way, I'm not proposing that this is an either or circumstance in terms of, either you are an artist who undertakes work inside conventional performance spaces or festival spaces or those things, or you're an artist who works in arts for social change. We know that there's lots of kind of movement in between. So again, speaking primarily as a public funder, and then in my time at OCAD, we've been talking about policy. How do we affect the encouragement? Eleftherios talks about the town Elefsinia. I got to work on my Greek pronunciation, as a cultural capital. In Canada, we had a very, very short-lived program called the Cultural Capitals of Canada, based absolutely on the model you speak to. And Calgary was one of the last cities to be designated a Cultural Capital of Canada in 2012. And it was really in that time where this conversation started about how are we including citizens, Calgarians, in improving our conditions, and how might artists be a part of that citizen group that is contributing to how these kinds of things might manifest and happen. And so as public funders, I would say that a characteristic, I'm not saying all, but many of us, because we're reporting to, in some way, government, very risk averse, not very much risk tolerance. And so it takes public funders longer to see the proof. And so here in Canada, as a city, I have a little bit more flexibility. I can adapt. I don't have an entire country like the Canada Council might have for the arts, or a province like the Alberta Foundation for the Arts. I'm working in cities where we are at grassroots. And so I know these artists. I see them at opening nights. I see them at various events and collective community activities. So, and I see the impact. And, Mika, you were referring to, how Eleftherios and his team are walking and talking about this work very authentically. And so there's a saying, I'm sure you walk the walk and you talk the talk, and you need to do both. You can't just do one or the other. And so in convincing the mayors and the other senior leaders, that takes time. So that's a big lesson that I've heard from you in just that description. 4 years working in this town. Public funders, with rare exception, we have one program that's a multi-year program, and it's very, very difficult to get into. We think in 1 year. Well, when you're talking about changing a community, changing a mindset of a community, who does that in a year? in any form. I can't think of anybody who could do that in a year unless you had millions and billions of dollars, which we know arts and culture doesn't have. And particularly when you distill it down to small grassroots organizations or individual artists. So the two lessons, two things I hear, a commitment to how long it takes for change to occur. And then I think the importance you talked about in year 3, I think, where you had the company from Belgium and other partners coming along, the importance of identifying others who are of like mind and like heart and like spirit, so that it isn't about one company creating all of this change. It's one company working with community who then finds others who have resource, who have gifts to share. That then help to create what I would say a sticky kind of change. So not where, okay, you built the skate park, we're done, we're going to go away now to the next town, but really staying rooted in that community and really responding in good ways to what the community is telling you is going to make that difference. And that's a very slight shift, I think, in that. Well, actually, no, it's a transformational shift. Like when you talk about bringing the mayor and having him listen and those things. The last thing I'll just say in this regard, Mika, is I'm also very conscious how easy it is, I think, to mistake, particularly for politicians or bureaucracy administrators who aren't embedded in the work like you are, to mistake arts for social change as an instrumental approach. That it's really the aesthetic, the importance of the art doesn't matter. It's you're going to, reduce pollution, or you're going to fix climate change. That is a very important distinction I think we need to make here. And quite honestly, as a funder, hard to tell the difference when I read an application. So I would really welcome that any kind of insight you might have for, is it organizations who have a long-standing history of social change or social justice or whatever that practice might be to demonstrate, versus again, I'm going to use another kind of cliche, one and done, where we built the park, we went with the kids, we're done, and it's more than that. And so as funders, I think we need to increase our and policymakers actually, we need to hone our ability to see that impact and identify it. And in this early stage, for me, I'll talk about me, we're not there. So it's hard for us to tell. And I think that's the world that we are needing to make our way into. So as a funder, I'm very conscious of that accountability that we should carry.
Thank you, Patty. Eleftherios, would you like to react to this?
Yes, yes, of course, it's a very central question. But I had the feeling, of course, that also on this level, we need to build other kind of alliance, because traditional, the cultural sector for a mayor, for a government, is a sector where they think they always are spending money, so it costs money. And this is like, we can cross different countries, we have the same mentality that it costs money, culture costs money, it's a kind of luxury. When you don't have money, you cut it. So that's why it's interesting to shift and to work with other sectors. It's not easy, of course, because, but it's also a way. I'll give an example. We work with international funds. Is a European program called Interreg. It's designed especially for economic and social change, environmental issues. And for example, we succeed now for 2 times to get inside with the project we do inside the Caribbean, French Caribbean, in Guadeloupe and French Guyana. And we enter completely the format of, they were looking for social cohesion and local development. So our project is still working with artists, architects, in terms of empowerment, of finding solutions with the citizens, have a creation process, but we are building it really very close to the needs, very close to the charter. So what we do, we have a program, training program for young artists that will be capable to do artistic outreach programs with young people and people of the community. We have a program of artistic creations for outdoor arts and public space. And we have a program where architects come and work together with the citizens, the public stakeholders, a public company, in order to improve everyday life, to find some solutions with abandoned building, with abandoned empty spaces, and things like that. So we succeeded to get some money, not from the Cultural Fund, but really from the economic development and sustainability and social cohesion. And I think this is also in conversation. Can give you another example. We work with the greater metropolitan area of Paris government. It's a small institution, and they work mainly on attractivity of the metropolitan area, but especially for the people, for the citizens. And so, because they are more cross-disciplinary, they have the culture is very linked with attractivity for the citizens. It's very linked also with what we call in Europe third cultural spaces that are more informal, like maybe all the Trans-Europe all members. And so they are more keen to work with us because they can understand that we are not focusing only on art. We work with a very high-level artists, but with artists that are really keen to work on these questions, to come and visit public spaces. Sometimes it gets more uncomfortable. Maybe it's not the same high level as to be on the stage, but actually it's very hard to make your living if you're only looking for creating performance for inner beautiful theater. So it is a change that is coming both from many different sectors, but I think also for public stakeholders, when the cultural sector brings new dialogue with public space, with attractivity, with city planning, then there is another kind of opening. And then it's not the same feeling for the stakeholders to just waste, into brackets, money for culture. So maybe there is a way of rebuilding this dialogue and also giving to understand that this way we can open also the way to better do this change, maybe to save some money, because if you work with the community, then we can find also some grassroots solutions that will cost less money. And because of the actual global warming and biodiversity crisis, this kind of approach is starting to have some more possibility of being understood by all these stakeholders. So I think there is also a shift on that the culture sector and the cultural funding, the Art Council, should not be anymore isolated from the other part. It's hard, I know, but we can try.
Yes, Eleftherios, I agree that we need to find other kinds of alliances and also break our barriers there and try and work with other sectors and vice versa, also other sectors opening up to the cultural sector. And in Europe, there are already some kinds of funding where we can go to and tap into with questions of social cohesion, democracy, civic participation, inclusion issues, housing issues, and so on. And how is it in Canada? When we speak about reimagining partnerships, Patty, when we prepared this session, you spoke about the friction between public benefit and private interest, such as in sponsorship. And how can cultural funders and institutions reimagine partnerships to better align with public good and private involvement without compromising values, without that artist and artistic work is being instrumentalized?
Thanks. You know, I think Eleftherios really kind of identified it in the last part of his comments there, where this need for collaboration and identifying others to work with is not only within the arts and culture sector itself, but really needs to go beyond that. And so again, something I see in artists who are undertaking this practice of social change or social benefit is exactly that. Their instinct is to go beyond the sector itself or the community itself, however you describe that. And I think that's really important. And again, it leads us to an approach that is about looking at the whole system, right? So in Calgary, we think about what we call an arts ecosystem. And so I'll try not to spend too much time describing it. The one thing I will say is that the system as we identify it right now adopts an Indigenous worldview. So it looks at the ecosystem in the same way that if you think about a natural system, an environmental system, you have keystone species, and then they in turn impact the well-being and the health of other species inside the system. Well, in an arts ecosystem, we identify the artist as a keystone species. Without the artist inside that system, there is no system. And in an Indigenous way of knowing and being, that in my part of Canada, that was the buffalo. And in the early times of colonialization, the buffalo herds here, which were in the several millions, were almost extinct within the span of 10 years. And so it greatly affected the ecosystem in the prairies, which is where I come from, to the point where there were other species like plant species that were extinct. Other animal species suffered severely. The Indigenous people in particular lost their primary source of food and housing and living. And so it was quite significant. And so I think here, in this sense, when we think about public and private interest, it's not that one is better than the other, or what I seek as an outcome is better than what a corporate sponsor in this example might be. However, adopting an Indigenous worldview, the importance of a relationship. Eleftherios includes organizations and individuals, including the mayor, in a relationship that is collectively about the well-being of that small town or that community or that neighborhood or whatever. And so when you start there versus a transaction, which is historically what grants have been, you ask me for money, I give you money, sometime later, a year or so, you give me a report. Oftentimes, I don't even see the work that you did. I don't even experience it. And so getting out of that transactional approach and into more of a relational approach where you do identify shared outcomes, shared desires for your community, shared possibility, I think is the way. And again, that takes time. And so when you think about project grants or 1-year windows, that's not enough time. And so how do we create funding systems that acknowledge and encourage the time to build relationship? And that might mean that as artistic enterprises or artists in their own practice, which we know happens anyway, you're working on multiple things at any one time. You're building these relationships across many planes and many platforms. And so how do we afford that? That's a very different way of as a administrator, a bureaucrat, as a public funder. I think my project is the thing you're focused on. It's the only thing you can do. That's what you have to get done in a year. And it's just not realistic. What person in their own life only focuses on one thing? We have jobs, we have families, we have friends, we socialize, we work, we do all these things all at the same time. Why would we think artistic practice would be any different? And I think that is something as funders, I need to embed and embrace, but also as artists. How do we encourage and afford you the opportunities where it isn't, I can only focus on this one thing, but that we invite you to live your life fully with all of the ways you identify in this world, and embrace that and support that. And I don't have an answer. So I'm hoping, Eleftherios, you do in that respect. And then the one last thing I'll just say is, in the spirit of this relationship building, I have three definitions of partnership or alliance. One is partners. As partners here, 50-50. You put in half, I put in half, we do something, something happens, and we go away and we come back some other time where we do 50-50. Collaborators recognize size and context. So maybe I can't afford to put 50 in, but I'm going to put 30 in because that's meaningful. But I also have lots of volunteers, or I have a deep connections in community, or whatever that is. But the collaboration, we know working together will create something more than individually. And then the last one, and I haven't come up with a nicer term, so maybe there's somebody in the audience today who will, I call co-conspirators. And co-conspirators are those of us who want to work together to change the system. And we will do what it takes, what gifts we have in order to do that. Eleftherios, I hear you and your company, you are co-conspirators in pursuit of creating better conditions in these neighborhoods and communities and towns that you work in. That's what I hope, that the co-conspirator part, I think that's maybe a distinction that I can make between those who are undertaking work as instrumental and those who are undertaking the work really from an impact, what is for the benefit of the community. I think that's one, but even then it's not easy to tell. I can hear it in your passion. I can hear it in the way you talk about your partners. How does that translate into an application, right? Or a proposal of some kind? That's something that I think I'm learning from you. Final thought.
Wonderful. Would you like to continue on this, Eleftherios?
Yes, thank you, Patty. Yes, I think the important thing, of course, I like very much this term of co-conspirators, but I think is not opposite to partners, because it's this kind of co-conspiracy that we all need now to face issues, and we can start from that and go to partnership. And I think it's very interesting to speak to all kinds of different people, those that are ready to become your conspirators and those that are seems very far away. But this is also very interesting, this kind of dialogue. What you were saying about this, when you receive an application, how can we know about that? So I think the whole is about this common experience. So we can go back to John Dewey and say, and think about art as an experience, and say the most important thing is how can you find a way to experience something with the funders, and the funders with the applicants. So I have another example from another center that is Trans-Europal members and also member of this project, Institute for X in Denmark, in Aarhus. And one of their motto was that the most important moment to find was to have a coffee with the mayor, to invite the mayor at your place and have a coffee. So this question of having coffee is like also to understand, to experience, to come to see a space. And how can we build something more systematic approach where to overcome this question of I can have only grants for 1 year, so to have these moments of, for example, visiting spaces around the city. And I think the best level of a cultural policy is a level of a city, of a district, where the founders, they have the occasion to also come and visit and meet and create relations. In this fact, creating these relations is, as I was saying before, also invite people of the economic sector that would like to promote the city, would like to create a better environment for usual business to install there, but also to open to city planners, also to open to private companies that would like to connect, to do. So all these people, they are looking maybe for other things at the beginning, but they are also humans. They would like to commit, and they would like also to live this kind of new experience. And because when we are moving to the city, why are we leaving nature to move in the city? It's because we think, and for several reasons it works, that we can live other kind of experience. And because we live all in a very digital world, we need maybe to reconsider that. So, for example, we can propose that, I don't know, for 2 years, for 3 years, there is a program also with the mayor, with the art council, with the the economic development, with the university, to do things together, to go and visit and understand what's happening and see how we connect. So in this way, in this kind of more systematic approach, a cooperation between a university, research, a business sector, city planning, the social cohesion, and the artistic circles and the artists, things can pop up, things can go on, because we will create the level not to be only in the room, because this is easy, it's interesting, but it doesn't allow us to understand, but also to go change spaces, go and meet the venues, go and meet other sectors, understand, and create these links that could facilitate like a common program, a common agenda, I would say, that will help us to find solutions. And by the time, it takes a lot of time, as I told you, it took me 20 years, and because I'm not leaving, because I think there is even more. And it's not only about local, because of course we work also a lot of international, and this question of local, of global and international, is to take into consideration a new way. It's not like it's not on the very business startup spirit. It's more how all these questions that are rising all around the world can be also adapted, can be experimented or experienced in your own community.
Thank you so much. Eleftherios, you quickly talked about research institution. Do you also see academic institutions becoming more open and understanding for and supporting the underground cultural work? Do you see that in your work? Is there a shift in the collaboration?
Yes, I think I can see it in France now. I have seen also in other institutions. First, in the link between academic research and artists. For example, there was artistic schools in Sweden, like Doc University, Dance and Circus, or now in France, like design schools, where they are launching new programs where an artist can do like a PhD with an academic researcher, and they can do something together, or they can really link the approaches. So this is one way. It's more formal, but it's very interesting as a process. And so the PhD could be also like a performance, could be an installation, could be a solution. So it's a new link between art and science, which is very interesting, but it could be also between art and social humanities and other things. This is one part. The other part is how also universities are are doing more action research. So they are more keen also not to do more only academic, but really give this kind of projects. And for example, what we have been doing in this project with OCAD University was very helpful, because it was how we understand how we build our ecosystem, how we have a reflection on what we are doing. And there are more and more universities that are really interested of this kind of grassroots transformation, where organizations linking art, environmental issues, social change can work together. And of course, at least in Europe, with all these big European projects, there is a place now more and more when academic universities can work with like NGOs and also public stakeholders. And it gives a lot of interesting projects, because all the actors now, we needed to get out from our center, public stakeholders, because they cannot find any more good enough solutions. Our sector, because we cannot also address all the issues, and we have to understand why it's happening and how our grants are a bigger value, because it's very hard for us to always begging for money, because we are giving a lot and we're not begging, we're just looking another part that is missing. So it's very important. And for the academic sector, I think it's now really this way for opening, both for the research, but also for the students. Because for me, the big change is the very young students of today, because we work a lot of them between 18 and 20, 25, that are really concerned about impact, about social change. So because of that reason, there are a lot of programs where I can speak about architecture. We work with the most central architecture school in Paris that are in front of the Louvre. And because they are in front of the Louvre, they say, we cannot teach architecture in Paris anymore because there is nothing anymore to build. So they all work, all the students, around Paris in neglected areas, because it's there where things are happening. So and that way, all these very strong, big, tremendous issues we're facing are pushing all of us to making new kind of projects, new kind of cooperations.
It's beautiful. And Patty, I have one more question for you about to measure precarity in the arts. The OCAD Cultural Policy Hub is developing tools to measure precarity in the arts. And how do you see data helping shift the narrative from crisis to a potential? How can this kind of cultural data mobilization support structural change also? Especially around EDIA and community representation.
Yeah, thanks, Mika. In Canada, there isn't really one sort of concerted approach to ensure that we have a database or a body of data that is really reflecting a sort of baseline or kind of current state, if you will, and even to rely on going back. And so I think what happens is, back to 1 year or short-term thinking, these research projects come up that are intended to measure how precarious it is for organizations, or like that the outcome has already been identified before you do the research. And so then you have research that tells you that's the outcome. And what I think about in terms of the work that I've been a part of and have been privy to at the Cultural Policy Hub is, we see the data in and of itself as the body that will then inform us about the state of precarity or potential or abundance or scarcity, whatever the words are that we might use to describe the current context. And so in the absence of that, what I would maybe, and this, for those of you who are the researchers and the academics in the room, please correct me in the chat. What I see as a kind of more objective approach to the data is then going to inform us in different ways. And in the absence of it, what we have now is a kind of anecdotal. We hear about the last company that closed, or we hear about the artists who suffered so significantly during COVID, or we hear about we need, more public funding. And what I can tell you is that in real dollar terms, right? So we haven't put inflation or growth or anything like that into the numbers. In Canada, there is more public funding now at all three levels of government than there has ever been. And so I don't think this is about throw more money. And Eleftherios, you said that, but we create more and more hoops for artists and companies to jump through to access this abundance of funds. Now, to be fair, there is greater competition. There are more people who are becoming aware who apply for the funds. And so I think for us at the Policy Hub, what we're trying to do is identify tools. And so one of them, and Sam, maybe we need to go back to the team and talk about what the name of it is. We have currently, the working title is a Precarity Index. And this would be a tool that as an organization, you could utilize and input information about your company that would then give you a snapshot of how precarious your organization is. And it's a series of a variety of measures that's been developed by one of our policy advisors. And so we hope that it gives companies data that then you can build your narrative around, and that is beyond the only answer is more money. Because what I know as a public funder in this time, it's going to be very, very challenging for us to get more money. However, to a point that both of you raised earlier, we do think there are other sectors and other jurisdictions that might be able to bring resource. Some of it might be money, but some of it might be relationship. Some of it might be engagement with community. Some of it might be introduction to others who do have resource, like sponsors who are of like mind, like heart, like spirit, in an effort to increase the opportunities. And that's the potential that I spoke about in our prep call, Mika. I think, and always, again, as someone who lives their life, when we were in the midst of COVID, it was very, very difficult to think about how we could identify possibilities of what after COVID might look like. And I'm sure many of you heard that the news and media was comparing COVID to the Spanish influenza at the turn of the last century. And that what we discovered was coming out of that, the movement of Art Deco, the movement of the Surrealist period, all came out of that. There is opportunity for a great proliferation of artistic expression that is artistic, but at the same time may very well help us make sense and make meaning of this time we are living in. And goodness knows, this world needs more sense making and more meaning makers. And those are artists. That's artists who do that. So I always advocate for the need for artists in our time right now and the value that they bring. I've been very fortunate to get to be a part of a couple of conversations, one around democracy and the participation of artists, democracy as a creative practice. And next week, I'm coming back to Toronto to participate in a conference that is about world making as a creative practice. So we are seeing those among us who are recognizing and trying to amplify what artists bring into not only conversation, but real activation. And I think, and I'm invited to these things because of my role at the Policy Hub and my relationship with OCAD University. And now I hope my relationship with Transatlantic. And so these are the more of us who are of this like mind, like heart, like spirit, who can advocate and champion, and Eleftherios in particular, because you have that experience, that you can match up with those artists who are getting their doctoral PhDs with academic, like I feel like there's a momentum here. And so the hub is looking for ways that we can really elevate and amplify that momentum while at the same time, and I think Eleftherios, you talked about this earlier, what I love that term glocal, right? The more we are aware of others who are working at the grassroots and not do exactly the same thing, but come and help revise and edit to meet our own regional or specific context. And particularly in Canada, or North America is known as Turtle Island among Indigenous populations. So I see myself as a co-conspirator because my family are settlers. My family came here from China. But I recognize the importance of Turtle Island and the over 250 nations that are recognized on that island. If you go to nativeland.ca, you'll see it. This Indigenous way of understanding that nation to nation, we need to find ways to work together in parallel journeys, I think is very, very important. And so these tools that we're developing, whether it's a precarity index, we have a public policy roundtable to continue a conversation about precarity of the arts in Canada next Tuesday that the hub is hosting. We're commissioning reports where we want to find things that as practitioners are going to be helpful to you in making the case to your communities for why additional support and encouragement and partnership is so important in this, and the tremendous outcomes that can come as a result of that. Final thought.
Thank you, Patty. And then maybe Eleftherios, without a tool to measure, but you have been working along in your transnational work with these sense-making and meaning-making communities. Have you noticed common threads, how cultural communities navigate precarity? And to end up in a positive note, what gives these local stories and a new life and a new resonance internationally? What do you see in common?
What I can see in common is that this question of the capacity we have, the communities, of course, to find really very interesting solutions. And of course, sometimes you go in countries where it's the situation is really very hard, where there is almost no public funding, but there is commitment. There is ways of thinking and trying to achieve. And of course, I agree with Patty that it's, and I think maybe it's not one or the other. We need, of course, and conversation and activation. Conversation, because it's very important to really give back this capacity of public dialogue, of public agora that we need to speak about. But we need to have the activation. We need, because not all of us are in the same maybe level of conversations, and also the body is very important, and also the non-human beings are very important, and also the nature is very important. So what I can see is that in different communities we have sometimes very different ways, of course, to address. The past is different. For example, if you are in Guadeloupe, the main population of Guadeloupe are former people that came from slavery. So they are having all this past of the slavery. So it's very hard to redefine. But because of that, they are facing with a new way the situation. But what's happening, and it's maybe even more true, the past 10 or 15 years, we're more or less facing all the same issues in a way, on a very different way. So it's not the same situation. They are not a remedy that can apply, but the issues are more or less similar. We have the issue, of course, of global warming, of biodiversity, of the big economical and social ghettos now, because we have the very rich, the very poor. We have this precarity that is, of course, stronger in these countries, and is not only for the artist. Of course, it's also for the other persons. So what's happening is, in that case, the position of art, of course, is very different in a very poor country and in a richer one. For example, in a very poor country, you can see the question of like it's a strong cultural link. It's a place where people, they can really have solidarity together and find really grassroots solutions with almost no money, creating community, sharing good, sharing values. And but on the other hand, they are inventing something which is really very powerful, because they do this immaterial consumption. They are not anymore in the consumerist system. They're trying to find other ways also to share things that we don't know anymore to share a time where we can be with the community, when you can cook all together, where we can share stories, when we can share other things. So in a way, because of this precarity, through art and culture, they give like more strength to the community. They give the capacity also, because the everyday life is very hard. And on the other hand, in more, of course, in richer countries, there are other issues, because now the artists, they are in between all this situation. And I understand, I completely agree with this question. Artists are not there to get, of course, instrumentalized. But on the other hand, artists have very strong instruments. And when they want, because maybe their art form is not part of that, maybe they work for other things. But when they're really keen about, I think they have the capacity in a good way to instrumentalize the change. They are very good co-conspirators, as Patty said. I think artists are maybe some of the best conspirators if they accept that they are not outside of the world. The problem with whether you're an artist is that you start to being an artist because in a way you don't want to be any more part of this world. So it's also this question how, as an artist, is like a philosopher. Plato was saying you cannot be a philosopher and a politician, but if you are not a politician, if you are a philosopher, then you have to accept that people that are not philosophers will govern this world. So there is a never-ending non-solution story, but because of the actual momentum, there is a space to come back. There is a space to the artist to come back to the society and go to knock on the door of Patty's office, of the mayor's office, and have a conversation. And I'm sure that Patty is already part of this way of thinking, but even a mayor from another situation can maybe change something. And when we succeed, at least to give this contradiction, I will give a last example. 2 days ago, we made a conference in Versailles. So Versailles, the big castle of Louis XIV, so the royal city of France. And there was the deputy mayor of Versailles about urban planning. And I had prepared the conversation. I was leading the moderation. So I asked him publicly, what is the influence of young people on your urban planning? And by then he said, no, because the young people, they never come to our local councils. And then second question, we have one of the most important architecture school in Versailles and one of the best landscape school in France. Do you have any links? And he said publicly, I never went to meet them. So I think by this way, but then he said, I understand what you're saying. And I think you're right. And I would like to go and do more things. So I don't say that what I did changed really something, but there is kind of systematic change that is coming. And this kind of deputy mayor is getting a little bit a minority. There are more people and more that understand now that you cannot do politics if you are in your office. You have to open.
Thank you so much, Eleftherios. Open up, conversation and activation. We have gone through a lot today, and I would like to ask the audience if there are any questions. We went from civic role of artists towards engaging communities and reclaiming space. We talked about public-private tensions and alliances. We have a new word, co-conspirators. And we are maybe looking for a better word if needed. And then at the end, we had about impact and data representation and policy transformation from precarity towards potential. Thank you so much, Patty and Eleftherios. And I would love to hear if there would be any questions for our fantastic two panelists. It's for European time already a little late in the late afternoon on a Friday. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing all the links. Thank you so much also for the technical team, and Jenny, my colleague, and Sam. Jenny, do you have a question?
I'm trying to look. I believe I did see Sarah had shared in the chat a question somebody had asked during the discussion. It says, it doesn't say to who it's for, so interpret how you wish. From your transnational work, have you noticed common threads in how cultural communities navigate precarity? What gives these local stories new life and resonance internationally? I mean, I believe you touched on that, but
Yes.
I think this question of resonance internationally, maybe we could interpret this question of saying, what are those key final words of what really resonates, and maybe can be those themes that we take forward from today?
There's a couple things that come to mind right away. One is, again, in my role as a public funder, and certainly in the role that I am serving as a policy fellow at OCAD University in the Policy Hub, the emphasis, and OCAD University does receive public funds as a post-secondary. The emphasis to me on that as a public institution or a public post-secondary is the public. And so I think there's an opportunity in the arts and culture realm to really re-embrace what that means to be public. You know, Eleftherios referred to the public agora. What is that? That's a very ancient concept. And I feel like we have not embraced it as a place of peaceful gathering and conversation and discourse. Instead, it's been a gathering of conflict, of opposite, of protest. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but when it's the only thing that we see or hear about, that worries me. And I think for those of us who are in this position about how do we re-embrace the public, and that is a global concern, that is not local. You can affect it at a local level. And then how we share that amongst this community of like hearts, like minds, like spirits, I think is a really important piece. And, you know, just nativeland.ca, you saw that the 270 nations prior to colonialization, those 270 nations actually got along for millennia, for thousands of years, notwithstanding wars and conflict and all kinds of horrendous behavior. However, to the idea of treaty came along long before Christopher Columbus ever showed up. And so I think there's something in that for us to remind ourselves about. And as a public institution, I believe it's one of my responsibilities to help do that. Final thought.
Thank you, Eleftherios. Do you have a final thought?
Yes, I think this question of resonance is very important word. There is a German sociologist and philosopher. His name is Hartmut Rosa. And Hartmut Rosa made a great book about resonance. He started on working about acceleration, explaining how the post-industrial societies were living. They made this acceleration that was so tremendous that destroyed a lot of things. So we are completely destroyed by this acceleration, and because you have to every year to run more and more in order to have to keep the same level of life that you had. So this is accelerating, it's never-ending process. So it's very interesting now, through COVID also, we all face this question of new resonance, because we had some time to listen to the nature, to listen to our fears, to listen what's happening, to get some more time for us. So I think about this question, the resonance now is how can we link these different stories of the communities and make them public, make them possible to have resonance to other communities, to other public stakeholders. This is also one of the strong impacts and results of our small-scale project, the Good Enough Transformation. My visit to Mexico City and to Cyprus, they gave me a lot of courage, a lot of resonance of how in Mexico, our partner culturals, they work with the community, they work with Xochimilco in order to provide research between ancestral ways of agriculture and engineer research, very high level in agronomy. Or when we are in Cyprus, how through a garden we can rebuild relations between a Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot community that are still separated by a buffer zone and army. So I think resonance is sure what we need to do more, to give more resonance to these stories, to make these stories on the front page. This is more important that because we can see that even this very strong government, and I'm speaking about your very big neighbor in the United States, by the end they are failing, and they are failing because they have the old system. They think that we should go on this way, but we cannot go this way. So this kind of resonance of giving against value of in these other scales, these things that have no big money value, is maybe the most important that we can do for bringing global change.
Yes, thank you. I think with both your answers as you spoke, I thought about the idea of, resonance, but also ripple effect across generations, across communities, across topics, across fields. So I think, hopefully today we've been one drop that will form a ripple effect and maybe cross and interact with other ripples out there. A lot of the theme of, small interactions, awareness, and people being part of this advocacy and, bringing in anyone who's interested in participate is a really key aspect. So, we've covered many projects, many approaches today, and many things we have to consider. But I think what we really see is there's room for everyone, and there's room for even those small gestures. So hopefully everyone who's attended today, thank you for joining us, and for everyone who contributed to the conversation, thank you. These are all small little pebbles that will help these ripples create new ripples and all connect to one another. So I thank you all. This is all very, very inspiring, and this is just the beginning of these conversations. As mentioned, the Cultural Policy Hub will have an event next week that is very much connected to this, and we've shared in the chat the link. And of course, the work of the Good Enough Transformation and Trans Europol's overall. So please, if any of these things, any of these organizations or initiatives today are new to you, please follow us. They're on social media or through our websites, because we're also making a commitment to all of you here that this is just the beginning of us coming and having these conversations. So thank you everyone today. Have a good night. Have a good rest of your day, depending on where you are joining from. And thank you for everyone who was part of this event. And once again, thank you to the Nordisk Kulturfond and our other supporters. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.